Sarah Chen Williams pulled her Tesla Model X into the private aviation terminal at Logan International Airport, her heart light with anticipation. The morning sun glinted off the polished hood of her car as she parked in her usual spot, marked Reserved, Executive Client. At 38, she had just closed the biggest deal of her career, a $500 million investment that would transform a struggling tech startup into the next potential unicorn. The clicking of her heels echoed through the parking garage as she walked towards the terminal entrance. Her navy blue Armani suit fit perfectly, and her leather briefcase contained all the documents she needed for the upcoming board meeting in Chicago. She had made this trip dozens of times before, but today felt different. Maybe it was the excitement of the recent deal, or perhaps it was just the beautiful Boston morning. As Sarah approached the terminal's glass doors, she noticed something unusual. Instead of Marcus, the friendly security guard who had worked there for years and always greeted her with a warm smile, there was a new face at the checkpoint. The guard, whose nameplate read Kevin Marshall, sat stiffly in his chair, his eyes narrowing as she walked closer. Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out her credentials, the same ones she had used countless times before. Her company ID card clearly showed her position as Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Williams and Martinez Investment Bank. The flight manifest listed her name as the primary passenger on the company's private jet scheduled for Chicago. "Good morning," Sarah said with her usual professional warmth. "I'm here for the 9:30 flight to Chicago." She placed her documents on the counter, expecting the routine verification process she had gone through hundreds of times. Marshall didn't respond to her greeting. Instead, he picked up her credentials with 2 fingers, as if they might be contaminated. His eyes moved slowly between the ID photo and her face, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. "This is the private aviation terminal," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but her face remained composed. 15 years in the corporate world had taught her how to handle such situations with grace. "Yes, I'm certain," she replied calmly. "I fly from this terminal twice a week. You can check the regular passenger list. I'm a frequent flyer." Marshall's lips curled into a smirk. "Anyone can make fancy IDs these days," he said, turning the card over in his hands. "And this photo, well, it could be anyone." Through the glass walls, Sarah could see her company's jet waiting on the tarmac. The pilot, Captain Rodriguez, was already doing his pre-flight checks. She had known him for 3 years, and he would certainly vouch for her, but the fact that she needed anyone to vouch for her presence here made her blood boil. Maintaining her composure, Sarah pulled out her phone and opened her email. "I have the flight confirmation here," she said, showing him the screen. "You can also call the aviation company's office. They know me well." "I'm sure they do," Marshall replied sarcastically, making no move to verify her claims. Instead, he picked up his phone. "Let me call additional security. We need to make sure everything is legitimate." Sarah's hand moved to her phone again, this time opening the camera app. Years of dealing with subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination had taught her to document everything. As she pressed record, she noticed other travelers beginning to enter the terminal. They walked past, some casting curious glances at the scene unfolding at the security desk. A group of executives from another company, all white men, approached the checkpoint. Marshall barely glanced at their credentials before waving them through with a friendly nod. Sarah kept recording, her lawyer's voice from past consultations echoing in her head. "Documentation is your best friend." The irony wasn't lost on her. Just yesterday, she had been featured in the Boston Business Journal for closing the massive tech deal. The article had praised her as one of the most successful investment bankers in the city. Yet here she was, being treated like an imposter because she didn't fit someone's idea of what a private jet passenger should look like. As she stood there, Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could call her company's legal department. She could demand to speak to a supervisor. She could make a scene. But something told her to wait, to let this play out while her phone recorded every moment. Sometimes, she had learned, victory came not from immediate reaction, but from strategic patience. Little did Marshall know, his actions over the next few minutes would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the entire private aviation industry's approach to security and discrimination. The tension at the security checkpoint grew thicker as Kevin Marshall continued his unnecessary scrutiny. Sarah's phone quietly recorded everything while other passengers moved freely around them. She noticed a young white woman in a business suit watching the scene with growing concern, her own boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand. "I need to verify these documents," Marshall announced loudly, making a show of examining every detail of Sarah's paperwork. "These days, you can't be too careful about who tries to access private areas." His emphasis on the word "who" wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Sarah checked her watch, 9:15 a.m. Her board meeting in Chicago was scheduled for 11:30, and she had never been late to a meeting in her entire career. She had built her reputation on reliability and professionalism, and she wasn't about to let this man destroy that. "Mr. Marshall," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, "I've been flying from this terminal for 5 years. I'm a platinum member of the aviation company's executive program. You can verify this with one phone call to the main office." Marshall's response was to pick up his phone again, but instead of calling the office, he dialed security. "Yes, I need additional officers at the main checkpoint. We have a situation." He glanced at Sarah with suspicious eyes. "Someone with questionable credentials attempting to access the private terminal." The young white woman who had been watching stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, "but aren't you Sarah Chen Williams? I read about your tech deal in yesterday's business journal. Your work is incredible." Before Sarah could respond, Marshall cut in. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a security matter." His dismissive tone only made the situation more obvious to everyone watching. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Captain Rodriguez. "Everything okay, Sarah? We need to start boarding soon to make the Chicago meeting on time." Just then, the terminal doors opened, and 2 security officers walked in. Sarah noticed their uncomfortable expressions as they assessed the situation. One of them, Officer Jenkins, recognized her immediately. "Ms. Chen Williams," Jenkins said, surprise evident in his voice. "Is there a problem here?" Marshall jumped in quickly. "These credentials need verification. She's trying to access the private jet area, and something doesn't seem right." Officer Jenkins looked confused. "Sir, Ms. Chen Williams is one of our most frequent flyers. She's cleared for all areas of the terminal." But Marshall wasn't backing down. "Protocol is protocol," he insisted, though no such protocol existed for double-checking properly credentialed passengers. "We need to do a complete background check." The crowd in the terminal had grown larger. Several people had their phones out, recording the incident. Sarah could see the hashtags forming already. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag privilege check. Hashtag aviation discrimination. The young woman who had recognized Sarah wasn't staying quiet anymore. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed. "I just walked through with barely a glance at my ID. How is this not obvious discrimination?" Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, though inside she felt a mix of anger and determination. She had faced discrimination before, but never so blatantly, never with such a clear paper trail. Her phone was still recording, catching every word, every dismissive gesture. "Mr. Marshall," Sarah said calmly, pulling out her business card, "perhaps you'd like to contact my company's legal department directly. I'm sure they'd be very interested in discussing proper security protocols." The mention of legal departments finally seemed to catch Marshall's attention. He glanced nervously at the growing crowd, the recording phones, and the sympathetic security officers. Just then, a commotion near the terminal entrance drew everyone's attention. Jessica Parker, the aviation company's regional manager, was rushing toward the checkpoint. Her face showed she had already been briefed about the situation. "Ms. Chen Williams," she called out, horrified at the scene before her. "I just got word about this unfortunate situation." She turned to Marshall, her expression hardening. "Mr. Marshall, step away from the desk immediately." The tables had turned, and everyone could feel it. Sarah stood tall, her phone still recording, as she watched Marshall's face change from arrogant authority to growing concern. He was beginning to realize that his actions would have consequences far beyond this morning's power trip. The clock showed 9:22 a.m. Sarah's flight to Chicago was waiting, but now she had a different kind of meeting in mind, one that would ensure no other passenger would face what she had just experienced. Jessica Parker, the regional manager, moved with purposeful strides toward the security desk. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was slightly disheveled, suggesting she had rushed to the terminal as soon as she heard about the situation. The clicking of her heels on the polished floor echoed through the now silent terminal. "Mr. Marshall," Jessica's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Step aside from that desk right now." Her face was flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She turned to Sarah, her expression softening. "Miss Chen Williams, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this incident." Marshall, however, wasn't ready to give up his position of authority just yet. "Ma'am, I'm following security protocols." "What protocols?" Jessica interrupted sharply. "The ones where you wave through some passengers without checking their IDs while harassing our top-tier clients." She gestured toward the gathered crowd, many of whom were still recording. "The ones where you create a public spectacle that violates every customer service standard we have." Sarah watched the exchange quietly, her phone still recording. The young woman who had spoken up earlier had moved closer, as if offering silent support. Officer Jenkins and his partner stood nearby, their postures clearly indicating whose side they were on. "I've been watching the security footage from my office," Jessica continued, her voice carrying across the terminal. "I saw how you treated other passengers compared to Ms. Chen Williams. Would you care to explain that difference in treatment?" Marshall's face turned red. "I was just being thorough." "Thorough?" A new voice joined the conversation. Everyone turned to see James Martinez, Sarah's business partner, striding through the terminal doors. His presence was unexpected. He was supposed to be in New York. "I got on the first flight out when our Chicago team called about the delay." James, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, moved to stand beside Sarah. "I just watched several videos of this incident that are already circulating on social media." "Thorough is not the word I would use." Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying authority that made everyone listen. "While I appreciate everyone's support, we're now 15 minutes behind schedule for a crucial board meeting in Chicago." She turned to Jessica. "I believe there are more constructive ways to handle this situation than creating further delays." Jessica nodded quickly. "Of course, absolutely." She turned to one of the other security officers. "Please escort Mr. Marshall to HR. His services are no longer required here." Then she gestured toward the terminal's private lounge. "Ms. Chen Williams, please allow me to personally escort you to your flight." As Marshall was led away, his earlier arrogance replaced by shocked silence, the crowd began to disperse. Several people approached Sarah to express their support, including the young woman who had spoken up. "Thank you for handling that with such grace," the young woman said. "I'm Emily Torres, by the way. I'm starting my first executive position next week, and watching you just now was educational." Sarah smiled warmly at Emily. "Sometimes the best response to discrimination is to let them dig their own hole while you maintain your dignity." She handed Emily her business card. "Call my office next week. We're always looking for young talent who stands up for what's right." As Jessica led them toward the private lounge, James fell into step beside Sarah. "You know," he said quietly, "this could be an opportunity for real change in the industry. Our legal team is already preparing a statement, but they think we should push for something bigger." Sarah nodded, her mind already working on possibilities. The incident had been unpleasant, but her business instincts told her this could lead to meaningful improvements in how private aviation handled security and discrimination. They reached the lounge, where Captain Rodriguez was waiting. "Miss Chen Williams," he said with a relieved smile, "we filed an adjusted flight plan. We can still make your meeting on time." As Sarah prepared to board her flight, she could see the terminal returning to normal operations. But she knew things wouldn't really be normal again, not here, not after today. Her phone had captured everything, social media was already buzzing, and she had a feeling that by the time she landed in Chicago, this story would have taken on a life of its own. She had walked into the terminal as a successful businesswoman and would leave as something more, a catalyst for change in an industry that desperately needed it. As Sarah's private jet cruised at 35,000 feet toward Chicago, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The videos of her encounter with Marshall had gone viral faster than anyone expected. Major news networks were already calling her office, and social media was exploding with comments and shares. Jessica Parker, who had personally escorted Sarah to her flight, had already sent 3 emails with updates about the situation. The first confirmed Marshall's immediate termination. The second contained a draft of the company's public apology. The third was more interesting, an invitation to help develop new security protocols for all private aviation terminals. "Look at this," James said, turning his tablet toward Sarah. They sat across from each other in the luxurious cabin, both still processing the morning's events. On the screen was a trending Twitter hashtag. #FlyLikeSarah. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination in aviation, turning Sarah's experience into a movement. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Chen Williams will be landing in Chicago in about 45 minutes. Weather looks clear, and we've made up most of the lost time." Sarah smiled, appreciating how her flight crew had pushed to get her to her meeting on time. She turned back to her laptop, where she was reviewing both her board meeting presentation and the growing media coverage of the terminal incident. "Our PR team wants to release a statement," James said, reading another email. "They think we should take a strong stance, maybe use this to push for industry-wide changes." Sarah thought about Emily Torres, the young woman who had spoken up at the terminal. "It's not just about making statements," she replied, her fingers moving swiftly over her keyboard. "We need actual change, real policies, better training." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Emily. "Ms. Chen Williams, the video of your experience has given me courage. Today I accepted that executive position, knowing I'll face challenges, but also knowing they can be overcome with dignity." As Sarah read the message, an idea began forming in her mind. She opened a new document and started typing quickly. James watched her with curiosity. He recognized that look on her face. It was the same expression she had when planning major business deals. "What are you thinking?" he asked, leaning forward. "We have the board meeting in Chicago, right?" Sarah said, not looking up from her laptop. "The same board that's been asking for ways to make our investment firm stand out in corporate social responsibility." James nodded slowly, beginning to understand where she was going. "What if," Sarah continued, "instead of just making statements about today's incident, we propose something bigger? A complete overhaul of private aviation security practices, new training programs, diversity initiatives. We have the influence and the resources to make it happen." The jet hit a small patch of turbulence, making their coffee cups rattle. But Sarah kept typing, her vision becoming clearer with each word. She was no longer just responding to discrimination. She was creating a blueprint for change. "The aviation company will be desperate to make this right," James added, catching her enthusiasm. "They'll want to avoid lawsuits and bad publicity. We could use that leverage to push for real reforms." Sarah nodded, then pulled up her board meeting presentation. With quick, decisive movements, she began adding new slides. The tech deal she'd closed was still important, but now she got something even bigger to present. "We're not just going to talk about what happened," she said, her voice firm with determination. "We're going to fix it. Not just for me, not just for this one terminal, but for everyone who's ever felt unwelcome in these spaces." As the Chicago skyline appeared on the horizon, Sarah finished her revised presentation. The incident with Marshall had tried to make her feel small, to make her feel like she didn't belong. Instead, it had given her a platform to make lasting change. Her phone buzzed one more time, another message from Jessica Parker. "Ms. Chen Williams, our board of directors would like to meet with you when you return. They want to hear your thoughts on improving our security protocols." Sarah smiled as she read the message. The morning had started with one guard trying to block her path. It would end with her helping to rebuild the entire system. Sometimes, she thought, victory comes in unexpected ways. The seatbelt sign came on as they began their descent into Chicago. Sarah felt ready, not just for her board meeting, but for the bigger challenge ahead. The real work was just beginning. The Chicago board meeting turned out very differently from what anyone had expected. Sarah stood at the front of the luxurious conference room on the 47th floor, facing not just her company's board members, but also 3 executives from the private aviation company who had flown in specifically for this meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice steady and confident, "I came here today planning to discuss our recent $500 million tech investment. But sometimes life hands you an opportunity to do something even more important." The room was silent as she clicked to her first slide. On the screen appeared a split image. On one side was a photo of Marshall blocking her path at the security desk, and on the other side were the social media statistics showing how quickly the incident had gone viral. In the 4 hours since this incident occurred, Sarah continued, our firm has received over 300 messages from people sharing similar experiences. This isn't just about one guard or one terminal. It's about an industry-wide problem that needs an industry-wide solution. Robert Chen, the eldest board member, leaned forward in his leather chair. Ms. Chen Williams, we've seen the videos. It's unacceptable. But what exactly are you proposing? Sarah clicked to the next slide, revealing a comprehensive plan she had developed during her flight. I call it the Aviation Equality Initiative, a complete overhaul of how private aviation handles security, training, and customer service. The aviation executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Sarah outlined her proposal. It included mandatory bias training, diverse hiring practices, clear escalation procedures, and regular audits of security interactions. But the most innovative part was still to come. And here's the key, Sarah said, moving to her final slides. We're not just asking for these changes, we're going to fund them. She turned to face the aviation executives directly. Our firm is prepared to create a $50 million fund specifically for implementing these reforms, starting with your company and expanding industry-wide. James Martinez, sitting at the back of the room, smiled as he watched the executives' expressions change from defensive to intrigued. Sarah had turned a potential PR nightmare into a business opportunity that no one could refuse. Ms. Chen Williams, Patricia Reynolds, the aviation company's CEO, spoke up. This is unexpected. We came here prepared to offer apologies and compensation. I don't want compensation, Sarah replied firmly. I want change. Real, lasting change that helps everyone, not just me. The room burst into discussion. Board members pulled out calculators, executives made phone calls, and lawyers scribbled notes. Sarah stood calmly at the front, watching her plan take root. Suddenly, Robert Chen raised his hand for silence. I have been on this board for 25 years, he said slowly. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Not just solving problems, but turning them into opportunities. He looked around the room. I moved to approve the full funding immediately. The vote was unanimous. Within minutes, hands were being shaken and documents were being drafted. The aviation executives looked relieved. Instead of facing lawsuits and bad publicity, they were now part of a groundbreaking initiative that would set new industry standards. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Emily Torres. Just saw the news about the Aviation Equality Initiative. You're trending again, but this time it's hashtag change takes wings. As the meeting wrapped up, Patricia Reynolds approached Sarah privately. You know, she said quietly, we have an opening on our board of directors. After seeing how you handled this situation, we'd be very interested in having your perspective. Sarah smiled but shook her head. Thank you, but I think I can do more good as a partner than a board member. Besides, she glanced at her phone, where messages were still pouring in. I have a feeling this is just the beginning. Later that afternoon, as Sarah prepared to board her return flight to Boston, she received one final message. It was from Kevin Marshall's replacement at the terminal, a young African-American woman named Michelle Robinson. Ms. Chen Williams, thank you for not just opening the door, but making sure it stays open for all of us. Sarah looked out the airport window at the planes taking off and landing. Sometimes victory wasn't about winning a fight. It was about changing the game entirely. And she had just changed the rules of an entire industry. 1 month after the incident, Sarah stood at a podium in the main hall of Logan International Airport. Behind her was a large banner that read, Aviation Equality Initiative, First Training Center. Camera flashes lit up the room as reporters gathered for the grand opening. The terminal where she had faced discrimination just weeks ago had been transformed. The security checkpoint now featured state-of-the-art equipment, but more importantly, it was staffed by a diverse team of professionally trained officers. The old desk where Marshall had stood was gone, replaced by a modern welcome center. Today marks not just the opening of a training center, Sarah began her speech, but the beginning of a new era in private aviation. She gestured to the group seated behind her, a mix of airline executives, security experts, and civil rights leaders who had joined forces for this initiative. Emily Torres sat in the front row, now wearing the uniform of a senior security trainer. After the incident, She had left her corporate job offer to join the initiative full-time, believing she could make a bigger difference here. Her presence was living proof that change was already happening. In just 1 month, Sarah continued, we've received partnership requests from 37 private aviation companies across the country. They all want to be part of this change. She paused, looking around the room. But more importantly, we've received over 1,000 applications from people wanting to join our new security training program. Jessica Parker, who had been promoted to National Director of Security Operations, stepped up to join Sarah at the podium. Together, they unveiled a large screen showing live feeds from security checkpoints at various terminals across the country. Each feed showed the new protocols in action: respectful interactions, professional conduct, and diverse staff members working together seamlessly. This is what progress looks like, Jessica announced proudly. Every person you see on these screens has completed our new comprehensive training program. They're not just security officers, they're ambassadors of change. The audience applauded as Sarah shared some impressive statistics. Complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped to zero at terminals where the new protocols were implemented. Customer satisfaction scores had risen by 40%. Even flight punctuality had improved, as the new systematic approach to security reduced delays caused by unnecessary confrontations. But the most surprising development came when James Martinez took the stage. We didn't expect this, he said, smiling, but our initiative has attracted attention beyond the aviation industry. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains are now asking us to adapt our training programs for their security staff. Sarah watched from her seat as James announced the expansion of their program. What had started as a response to discrimination had grown into a movement that was reshaping customer service and security practices across multiple industries. During the question and answer session, a reporter raised his hand. Ms. Chen Williams, have you heard anything from Kevin Marshall since the incident? Sarah's response was measured and professional. This initiative isn't about one person or one incident. It's about creating systemic change that prevents such situations from happening to anyone, anywhere. After the ceremony, Sarah took a private tour of the training center. The facilities included virtual reality stations where trainees could practice handling difficult situations, classrooms where they learned about implicit bias and cultural sensitivity, and a state-of-the-art security lab for studying the latest screening technologies. In one classroom, she paused to watch a training session. The instructor was using video footage from Sarah's incident as a teaching tool, showing new recruits exactly what not to do and how to handle situations properly. Ms. Chen Williams, a trainee, called out, recognizing her. Thank you for turning a bad moment into a better future for all of us. As Sarah walked through the terminal later that evening, preparing to board her flight to New York for another business meeting, she noticed something different. The atmosphere had changed. Security officers greeted every passenger with the same professional courtesy, regardless of their appearance. Travelers moved through checkpoints efficiently but respectfully. Her phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Just finished training the first class of new officers. They're amazing. Every single one of them gets it. Change is really happening. Sarah smiled as she walked toward her gate. The incident with Marshall had tried to make her feel powerless, but instead, it had revealed her true power. The power to transform an entire industry. Sometimes, she thought, the best revenge isn't getting even, but making sure no one else has to go. Rough what you experienced. Victory, she had learned, came in many forms, but the sweetest victory was creating lasting change that helped others rise alongside you. 6 months after the launch of the Aviation Equality Initiative, Sarah found herself addressing a much larger audience. The United Nations had invited her to speak at their annual conference on corporate social responsibility. The Grand Hall was packed with business leaders, government officials, and civil rights activists from around the world. What began as a confrontation at an airport security desk, Sarah said into the microphone, her voice echoing through the hall, has evolved into a global movement for change. Behind her, slides showed the initiative's remarkable progress. Over 200 airports had adopted their training programs, complaints of discrimination had dropped by 85% nationwide, and employee satisfaction in the aviation security sector had reached an all-time high. In the front row, Emily Torres beamed with pride. She had just been promoted to National Director of Training Programs, and under her leadership, The initiative had trained over 5,000 security personnel. Her innovative approaches to sensitivity training had earned recognition from security experts worldwide. But our greatest achievement, Sarah continued, pointing to a new slide, isn't in the numbers, it's in the stories. The screen showed photographs of diverse security teams working together, happy travelers moving smoothly through checkpoints, and testimonials from both staff and passengers. James Martinez, sitting among the dignitaries, smiled as he remembered how their simple training program had sparked a revolution in customer service. Major hotel chains, shopping centers, and even sports venues had now adopted versions of their protocols. The Aviation Equality Initiative had become a blueprint for institutional change. After her speech, during a private reception, Sarah was approached by Patricia Reynolds, the aviation company's CEO, who had initially feared a PR disaster. "You turned our biggest crisis into our proudest achievement," Patricia said, raising her glass in a toast. "Our company's value has increased by 30% since implementing your programs." But the most surprising visitor at the reception was Kevin Marshall's daughter. The young woman, in her early 20s, had asked to meet Sarah privately. "Ms. Chen Williams," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to apologize for my father's actions, but I also wanted to thank you. After what happened, Dad was forced to attend your training program as part of his settlement with his new employer. It changed him. Last month, he stood up against discrimination at his workplace. He said you taught him that." Sarah listened thoughtfully, remembering how far they'd come. The incident that could have ended with anger and lawsuits had instead sparked a movement of education and understanding. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared to leave the UN building, she received an urgent call from Jessica Parker. "You won't believe this," Jessica said excitedly. "The International Aviation Authority wants to make our training protocols the global standard. They're voting on it next week." Walking through the busy New York streets, Sarah thought about all the lives that had been touched by this initiative. Security officers who now felt proud of their work. Travelers who no longer feared discrimination. Companies that had learned that doing the right thing could also be good for business. Her phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Just interviewed our 10,000th trainee today. She said she chose this career because of your story. We're not just changing procedures, we're changing lives." The next morning's newspapers carried headlines about the UN conference. "Aviation Equality Initiative Goes Global," read one. "From Discrimination to Transformation. How One Woman Changed an Industry," declared another. But Sarah's favorite was a small article in the business section, "Security with Dignity, a New Standard in Customer Service." As Sarah boarded her flight back to Boston, she noticed something that brought tears to her eyes. The security officer who checked her credentials was a young Muslim woman wearing a hijab. Next to her stood a black male officer, and they worked together with professional efficiency and natural comfort. "Welcome, Ms. Chen Williams," they said in unison, their smiles genuine and proud. This, Sarah thought, was what real victory looked like. Not just overcoming one instance of discrimination, but creating a world where such incidents became increasingly rare. A world where security and dignity could coexist, where professionalism knew no color or gender, and where one person's stand against injustice could ripple out to touch countless lives. As her plane took off, Sarah opened her laptop to review the latest expansion plans for the initiative. The incident with Marshall had tried to make her feel small, but instead, it had revealed just how big an impact one person could make when they refused to let discrimination have the last word. 1 year to the day after the incident with Marshall, Sarah stood once again at Logan International Airport's private terminal, but this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a graduating class of 50 new security officers, representing the 1,000th class trained under the Aviation Equality Initiative. The terminal had been transformed beyond recognition. Gone was the stern, unwelcoming security desk. In its place stood a modern welcome center staffed by professional, diverse personnel. Above them hung a plaque that read, "Everyone who belongs here, belongs here." Emily Torres, now Executive Director of Global Training Operations, stepped forward to address the graduating class. "1 year ago, I witnessed discrimination in action right where you're standing. Today, you represent everything we've done to ensure that never happens again." The ceremony was being broadcast live to airports around the world. The Aviation Equality Initiative had become the gold standard in security training, adopted by over 500 airports across 6 continents. But more importantly, it sparked similar programs in other industries, creating a ripple effect of positive change. James Martinez joined Sarah at the podium, holding a thick report. "The numbers tell an incredible story," he announced. "Discrimination complaints down by 95%, customer satisfaction up by 60%, employee retention improved by 75%, but the real success is in the lives we've touched." As if to prove his point, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. Kevin Marshall, the former guard whose actions had started it all, had asked permission to attend. He stood quietly at the back, watching the ceremony with tears in his eyes. His daughter, now one of the initiative's trainers, stood proudly among the staff. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from the White House. The president was planning to sign new legislation inspired by the Aviation Equality Initiative, establishing national standards for security training and anti-discrimination protocols across all transportation sectors. "When I faced discrimination in this terminal 1 year ago," Sarah addressed the graduates, "I had two choices. I could fight back with anger, or I could fight back with change. We chose change, and look what you've helped build." The graduates, wearing their new uniforms, represented every race, religion, and background. Among them was a young man in a wheelchair who had helped design new security protocols for passengers with disabilities. There was a former refugee who now specialized in helping international travelers feel welcome. Each graduate had their own story of why they joined the program. Jessica Parker, who had been promoted to International Director of Aviation Security, presented each graduate with their certification. "You're not just security officers," she told them. "You're guardians of dignity, protectors of respect, and ambassadors of change." After the ceremony, Sarah took a quiet moment to walk through the terminal. She passed the spot where Marshall had tried to block her path, now transformed into a welcome desk where a friendly officer greeted each traveler with respect. The walls displayed photographs showing the initiative's journey, training sessions, graduating classes, and successful implementations around the world. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a young black girl in Texas. "Dear Ms. Chen Williams, today I saw a security officer who looks like me at the airport. She told me about you. Thank you for making it possible for me to dream of wearing that uniform someday." As Sarah prepared to board her flight, she noticed something remarkable. The terminal was filled with a natural, easy flow of diverse travelers and staff, all moving through security with dignity and respect. No one was made to feel less than, no one was treated with suspicion, and everyone belonged. The final victory wasn't in the numbers, the awards, or the global recognition. It was in the small, daily moments of human dignity. It was in the confident smile of a hijab-wearing officer doing her job. It was in the respectful interaction between a wealthy executive and a security guard. It was in the understanding that true security came not from suspicion and discrimination, but from respect and professionalism. As her plane took off, Sarah looked down at the terminal growing smaller below. What had started as one woman's stand against discrimination had grown into a movement that was changing the world, one airport, one interaction, one person at a time. The story that began with "You don't belong here" had ended with everyone finding their place, their dignity, and their respect. And that, Sarah thought as she watched the sunset from her window, was the greatest victory of all.